when someone has a problem in life, the very first place they should think of going with it is the church. But sadly, I think for most people, they're going to dismiss that pretty quickly because they look at their church and they think, well, my church, they've got great programs for kids and they do a great job on weekends, but I don't even know who I go to with this.
Yeah, right. What is a pathway that's even there?
Everything you do from then on is different.
One of the detectives, I think his name was
He was a
Derek.
golden boy.
All we can do right now is come together.
Extreme domestic violence, multiple rapes.
Hey, so glad you're with us on Life Support. And we love doing this podcast because we're telling stories. And we're telling stories about those that have come out of suffering and trauma and have found hope in Jesus Christ and reconciliation and redemption. So we hope that you find that same joy and hope in your own life today. I have a very special guest with us. His name is Bailey Seiler. He's the operations director for one of our great partners here, FiveStoneMedia.com, or Five Stone Media rather, and their website is FiveStoneMedia.com, where you can watch a video of this very podcast. And Five Stone is a company that has a very unique mission. And Lee's been telling us, he was here last time, and Lee, thanks again for being here. And you were discussing your own story of coming out of alcoholism and God redeeming you through various people in the church that just did their thing, and you were able to find traction that way. But we also talked about how important it is for people to be willing to tell their own stories and to hear stories. So what does hearing stories do for someone that's struggling? How does that help people?
Well, it helps them. So many people who are struggling, whatever it is, addiction, mental health issues, issues with their kids, whatever it is, marriage issues, they think they're alone. They think this doesn't happen to other people in their church. Their friends don't do this. This is not a normal thing. And when someone's willing to share their story openly, it is, testimony is a big sort of a churchy word, but when someone shares their experience of struggle and redemption, what Christ did in their life, when someone's willing to share that, other people hear that, and you never know who's going to hear. It's really interesting. You just don't know who needs to hear those stories. So it's really important if you have, and almost everyone has something. One of the things I run into with a small group in the past, one of our small group discussions was about story. And a lot of people in our group said, well, I don't have any sort of story in my background that, I don't have any kind of struggle that I think of. But there is something in your experience that you can share with someone else. And maybe it's just one small decision that you had to make, and how you did that, and how you prayed about that, and how you weighed that against Scripture. It could be just some small daily life thing like that that someone needs to hear how to do because they don't know how to do it.
Yeah, that's really good. And sometimes, we go to these conferences and we hear these stories of, I was a Hell's Angel living in a garbage can and stuff like that. And we almost look down or, kind of ignore the Christian who just has walked with God and doesn't have those, horrible stories. And there's much to be learned from a person who has walked consistently with God. Those stories are just as important as the one who is being redeemed off the street. Right.
All the people who are out there in the alleys and drug addicts and whoever who are struggling, they would give a lot to have a very boring life. Yeah. What looks like a boring life. An obedient life, a life of prayer and strong relationships and church and Scripture and listening to God. And those sort of things that a lot of Christians take for granted and who look at their own life and they think, my life's boring. Your life is exactly lived out according to God's plan. How could that be boring? There are a lot of people who would love a life like that. So share that. Just go out and share. Here's what I do to stay spiritually strong. Here's how I grow spiritually. This is what I do every Wednesday or whatever. Just share whatever.
These are the people that have helped me and
exactly
that kind of thing. Yeah. And so you have done a lot of research in preparing to help churches deal with people that have been in trauma and coming out of trauma and that kind of thing. What have you learned about how well churches are equipped to deal with people who are struggling, people who are suffering, people who are in trauma?
It's hard. I have so many friends who work in ministry, pastors and other people who work in church ministry, and it's such hard work. It really is a lot of relationship work, and I understand that it's a dedication and a commitment, and it's a calling. And as they say, God calls you to do something, and calling doesn't go away. Mm-hmm. God's call is permanent. And so I think that sort of lost my train of thought, but I think that it's difficult for ministry leaders to try to address trauma issues, mental health issues, whatever it is, for several reasons. One, they're too busy. And so, and in that case, oftentimes senior leaders and other leaders in the church try to do too much themselves. And when someone comes into church on Sunday morning and says, I need to talk to someone. Last night, my son said he's been thinking of killing himself. That's a very, very big deal. And you're not going to just turn that over to anyone.
That's right.
But there are a lot of things that can be turned over to other people if those people are equipped. And so I think one of the problems in the church is that we are not equipping the saints to do the work of being the church. When someone has a problem in life, the very first place they should think of going with it is the church. But sadly, I think for most people, they're going to dismiss that pretty quickly because they look at their church and they think, well, my church, they've got great programs for kids and they do a great job on weekends, but I don't even know who I'd go to with this.
Yeah, right. What is a pathway that's even there?
Right. Mm-hmm. So just simply to identify that pathway, who is the person that's responsible, and then put them up front on a weekend and say, hey, if you ever have a problem with this, here's what you do with it. Mm-hmm. We want to be there for you. We might not have all the answers, but we're willing to support you in whatever way we can. Just opening the door a little bit like that, it could save someone's life.
Yeah, and I know you're committed to doing that. And through LifeSupport curriculum, and this is relatively new, but it's really important. Tell me about it and what you hope to accomplish by what you're doing to support the local church.
Yeah, so we really believe strongly that, we have a mission at Five Stone Media to use story to bring hope and healing to people in need of change. And story is really, really significant in our work. Most of our work happens through video. For instance, there's a video version of this podcast that we put out on our site on the LifeSupport YouTube channel. But we use story, and oftentimes really small pieces of story, 2 minutes long, 3 minutes long, to introduce a topic that someone is struggling with. Through real life stories, through shared experience stories. So we'll have someone like myself or hundreds of other people who might tell their story about abuse or addiction or suicidal thoughts or sudden loss in their family or whatever it is, anxiety, depression, all these things. And they'll tell us, and we provide those type of video resources to the local church as a way for them to open the door with people, as a way to start discussions. And then we provide discussion guides that go along with those application guides. We also have small group curriculum. So we equip small groups to talk about, how do we talk about mental health issues? How do we talk about a sudden loss of a child? So what we want to do is we want to prepare the body of the church to be able to come alongside people who are struggling with something. And we understand that not everybody knows how to talk to someone about addiction. Mm-hmm. Not everybody knows how to talk to someone about suicide or even grief. But everyone can be equipped And it doesn't take that much work to know how to talk to someone about this, just not as a counselor, not as a preacher, not as an expert theologian, but just as a friend in Christian community. How do I sit next to someone and just be there for them when they're going through something really hard? So those are the kind of resources that we provide. And this radio show, this podcast, is one of those resources, too, that helps equip people. People can listen to this. They hear people's stories. They hear experiences that they might not be familiar with. But now when they hear about it from someone else, when someone comes to them for help, at least they've heard about it in the past.
Yeah, I think that, in each person's story, there's something that you can connect with. And recently I was doing morning devotions, and Crossway, a publishing company, offers short videos as part of the ESV Bible app. And I just clicked on the suffering devotional, and there was an author there, and he was talking about suffering, and I'm kind of half tuned in and half tuned out. And then he said, and I really struggle with my disability. And I realized that, okay, now I'm starting to get interested. He said, I struggle with not being able to lift my kids. I struggle with my arms hurt so bad some days that my mind is numb. And he went on and on. And then he started relating it to Jesus, and how he takes hope in Jesus. Now I'm really interested. And then he said, and because of this, I really struggle with depression. And if you're struggling with depression, and then he went on, and now I'm totally sold out. I ordered the guy's book because his story connected. I'm not disabled like that. I don't have those experiences, but that one word, depression, that's where I went, yeah, okay, now you have me.
Right.
And that's what the power of story.
Yeah. And that's sort of the centerpiece of all the resources that we provide, and we've got a library for churches that we put out there. LifeSupportResources.org is one of our websites, and that's the library of all the resources. And whether it's videos, small group curriculums, webinars, conferences, we have a journal, the Life Support Journal, that is mental health workers. Professionals writing to the church. All of that is based around stories, so that, like you say, someday someone can hear something familiar and strike a chord with their own struggle. And as I said, we're not trying to be experts, and we're not trying to create experts, but what we're trying to do is to find a way that people can apply the work of the church and Christ, Scripture, into these everyday struggles that people have. Because people think that this is rare. People think that it's odd that people have struggles and it doesn't belong in church. But every pew of every church has someone sitting there with problems.
That's 100% right. And we have, in some corners of our modern church, we have put aside the idea of inherited sin and depravity and the fall and the things that make this world broken. And so we want to believe that the world is somehow going to be better than it really is, but we are in a broken world, which means every single person is broken. And so there's always something going on. And that doesn't mean we have to get morose, and that doesn't mean we have to be up, talking about how terrible things are. But what it is an acknowledgement that my stuff can help somebody else, and their stuff, I should not judge them because I got my stuff.
Right.
And judgment is what, you're talking about people coming to the church and not feeling like they belong, and then they're out of there. I think what they're feeling is judgment because people aren't in touch with their own sin.
Right.
So how dare you?
Yep.
You don't belong here.
Yep. And I love that you're talking about the people, the reaction of people. Of the church. The church is the people. I think that in America, at least these days, we tend to rely on church leadership to make church happen. And church should happen through the body of the church more than it happens through church leadership. And I think one of the issues that we struggle with in the United States, in modern America, is that this idea of loving others. What does that mean to love others? Growing up, to me, love is an emotion. And so love when I'm supposed to love someone else, that I think of as something that happens inside of me. I feel it in here, maybe in my head, but probably in my heart. Oh yeah, I love them. But loving people can't stop at the heart or the head. Loving people has to be seen. And to love someone means to interact with them and be active with them. And so if you see someone who's struggling with depression, loneliness, grief, whatever it is, you can love them from here until kingdom come. And if you don't tell them anything, if you don't help them in some practical way, if you're not there just to say, hey, I understand, I feel for you, I really do, and I'm so sorry you're going through this. That's what love needs to look like at the very least.
Yeah.
It can't be something that's just inside.
And sometimes it begins by just giving someone 5 minutes on a Sunday morning and just making eye contact and not be looking around. Just tune in, listen, and then revisit that at some point. People, when I come up to them a couple of weeks later, if they share something that's happening in their lives, they're stunned that I remembered.
Yeah.
And then they feel love. They feel like, wow, you do care.
Well, isn't it sad that they're stunned?
I know.
It should be the normal thing.
But
that
again,
happens.
we're living in a broken world, and
Right.
the church reflects that brokenness because we're all broken.
Right.
But and pastors, you can teach brokenness, and you can free your church to be broken.
Yeah.
Because you've got to get back to the theology of sin and the effect that sin has on us, and that the only hope is redemption through Christ, but that we're all in process. Then you free your people up to come out and say, yeah, I'm broken too.
And I know you do that really well. I know
Ridgewood Church is the perfect church.
Yeah, it is.
Definitely. We've established that.
I should attend here sometime.
I think you should.
But there are a lot of church leaders who do this well. But I know there are a lot of church leaders, pastors, who are afraid to do this, because to be vulnerable. I read something great from John Townsend just this morning. Is our capacity to be loved is equivalent to our capacity to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And so church leaders, if you want to be loved and you want a church that loves, man, you got to encourage vulnerability.
Yeah. And you have to exhibit it. And I'm like a lot of people where I can exhibit vulnerability, but I'm only going to let you this close. I know the line where I'm comfortable, and where God challenges me is, no, let them come all the way in. Because are you okay with them seeing what's really in your heart, and are you okay with them getting close enough to you where they can say to you, you need to change that. You need to work on that. Well, I love you, and that's why I'm telling you this. But here's the problem pastors have too, Lee, is they've got boards. They sit under boards.
Right. And
boards are normally well-meaning people who don't work their 40 hours a week, who come in for a once-month meeting or something. They're looking at finances. They're looking at, is the church growing? They're looking at all the exterior kind of markers. Pastors are under a lot of pressure to meet those guidelines. And so the idea of being vulnerable is terribly frightening because you may not even trust your board. So I would encourage you guys to teach boards how to free up pastors.
Yeah. Boards do need some education too and equipping to understand that they're not just part of the business structure of a church.
No.
They're part of the ministry.
They're spiritual leaders.
They're spiritual leaders,
Yeah.
and they need to set a tone for what's going to happen in the church. And part of the problem is all this stuff that you're talking about, pastoral vulnerability and the guardrails that people put out, boards or pastors or whoever it is. We tend to want to define how God is going to do His work. And so we say, no, okay, I have my own spiritual counselors that's who's going to help me. When God might just want to use Bob, who shows up on Sunday morning, to help you.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's real easy for us to get in God's way, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And, I've talked to a lot of pastors who share similar experiences. I've been fortunate. I've worked in churches where There's been, kind people and gracious leaders, but I know a lot of pastors that struggle. So how can a church, we have about 2 or 3 minutes here, how can a church access life support? And how does it become available to help educate about these kinds of issues?
Well, a couple things. First of all, LifeSupportResources.org. Any church leader, parachurch organization, mental health professional can go there and benefit by some of the free resources that we have available just to anyone. You can also, churches can join a monthly or annual membership. We know there are a lot of underfunded churches out there, so we're taking some steps to do some fundraising around helping underfunded churches have access to these kinds of resources. And just people who are involved in ministry, if you're listening to this and you know a church that could use this kind of help, just pass it along to them. I can be emailed at lee@fivestonemedia.com. And I think that we're continuing to populate this library ongoing. So it's not stuff that gets old. We'll load up maybe 10 or 12 new resources every month to the site. There are over 100 now on there. And so we want to equip where churches need equipping. And so if there are things that churches specifically need, we'd love to hear from them in that regard too, so we can create something that would be helpful for them. For instance, we have not dipped our toe into helping to equip boards specifically, and that's something we could look at doing in the future.
Yeah, and here's what I really like about what you're doing is you use not only experts, you use ordinary people and their stories are heartbreaking, compelling, real, raw, and they're amazing. And these people that are willing to tell their stories that's going to inspire you, if nothing else.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that.
Our world is full of broken people, and so there are some really helpful broken stories out there that we can tell.
Yeah. So again, give me the website address and where they can get in touch with you.
LifeSupportResources.org, and our contact is available on there also, but just lee@fivestonemedia.com.
Okay. Thanks for being with us, Lee. I appreciate it so much.
You're welcome.
It's
Thanks
great to see
for
you.
the time, Paul.